Morning.
Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to the BlackUSA.News morning show, co-hosted by the one and only, the incomparable, the indomitable, Marcia Jews.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Good, good.
We are
well rested. Kavette Kane, good morning.
Good morning.
Good. We are joined by Baltimore City Comptroller Bill Henry.
Good morning, Donnie. Good morning, ladies.
Good morning, Comptroller.
Good morning, Mr. Henry.
So how are you? How's the job?
Well, it's been a definite experience this last month and a half. We've been getting our arms around the full extent of how the Comptroller's office has been working, and we've started making some changes, and we've got some further changes planned, but feeling pretty good about it.
Some changes planned. So you're in your assessment mode, sir? You're looking at what's on first, who's on second?
Well, so we were doing some assessing earlier during the transition period. One of the especially nice things about not having a challenger in the general election is it let me get comfortable with doing transition work earlier last year than some of my colleagues who actually, had to win the general election to be assured of the position. And so we were doing interviews last fall and late in the summer, but that wasn't the same thing as actually being there in the office every day,
right,
seeing the day-to-day work. And so we spent a lot of December after the swearing in on December 8th. We spent a lot of December not making changes, but just trying to make certain that we fully understood the status quo, so that when we did start making changes this month, I missed a month. When we started making changes in January, we were not going to confuse ourselves or make a misstep because we had been unaware of some little detail of the process. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
That's huge. What made you decide to become the comptroller? Why the comptroller position?
Thank you. That's a great question. I had been on the city council for 13 years, and I had enjoyed that work. I had enjoyed being a council person, but it was often very frustrating to be told to stay in my lane. The council people are often either overtly or quietly encouraged to just focus on what's happening in their district. And a lot of times the problems that we face in the city, they are the result of citywide issues and citywide effects. And so I looked at I'll be honest, in the summer of 2018, I was looking at running for something citywide. And then some people came up to me that fall and said they heard that I was running for comptroller. And I said, "Really?"
Unbeknownst to you?
I hadn't heard that. And I tracked it down actually to a grad student on Facebook who had literally done a thought experiment as a post. And he was like, who would be somebody who would be good running for comptroller? And so I met with him and I thanked him. I said I was flattered. I hadn't thought about that. And then a few weeks later, I got a call from a gentleman who at the time was the head of the Democratic State Central Committee for Baltimore City, and he took me out for a cup of coffee back when you could do that. Right. And he said, you really should think about it. I've looked at the numbers, and I'm not sure that Joan Pratt is as politically strong as people think she is. And looked at your background, and you would be a really good comptroller.
So
And
what's in your, well, hold on a second, Comptroller. What's in your background for him to say that?
well, I have an MBA, and I have an undergraduate in urban studies and public policy, and I have a background in community development before I was on the city council. And the two things, the two biggest responsibilities that the comptroller has are the city's office of real estate, where I have been a real estate agent, and the community development has given me a great deal of understanding of the real estate development process in the city, and the Department of Audits. And people have long considered that the previous comptroller was a CPA, and people connect an accountant with auditing.
That's what I
But
did.
right, but the real important thing about auditing is not just making sure the numbers add up. The really important part about auditing is knowing what questions to ask and what things to be looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And if all you focus on
Yeah.
is, do these numbers add up? Well, you may find that in some places these numbers don't add up, but you'll miss the big picture of why are you focusing on those numbers and not these numbers over here.
So you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint, right?
And that is the experience that I gained on the city council.
Okay.
Is I often joke with people that being on the city council is like getting a degree in how Baltimore works,
Right.
because it's not like the General Assembly where you're on one committee and over a period of time you might become a subject matter expert in finance or in housing or in economic development. At the city council, you're on multiple committees every term. And if you've been there for a couple terms, you will end up serving on a bunch of committees, and you have to learn something about all the different parts of city government. And I think that has really been one of the most important things to prepare me for this job. Is I've dealt with the different problems that have occurred in lots of different agencies. So I know what to be looking for now when the comptroller, whose responsibility as a watchdog is to make sure that the agencies are being effective and efficient, I have a good idea of what questions I should be asked.
Awesome. So one question I have for you, Mr. Henry, is you mentioned that back in December, when you were resworn in, you were looking at the status quo and to make adjustments. What was the status quo, and what adjustments are you considering making?
Thank you for the question. So the way that the city has run the Board of Estimates, which is administered out of the Comptroller's office, for most of my lifetime, I believe. I can't speak to before that, but it's the agencies make their requests of the board on paper, and then the board processes those requests. We approve most of them as routine matters. Sometimes items are more either controversial or confusing, and so they get pulled off onto a non-routine agenda, so they actually get individually discussed. But over the course of these weekly meetings, in a year, the city approves at least $500 million worth of purchasing, contracting, et cetera. And all the backup information for all those individual decisions, that all exists in paper in file folders in the comptroller's office. And to put it in perspective, back in 1996, 1997, the city council started moving towards a computerized legislative tracking system, and ended up working with a company to purchase Legistar. And that's the legislative database that the city council uses and has been using for over 20 years. So if you want to find out information, about any type of legislative matter that the council has taken up in the last 20 years, you just go to the city council's website, you click on search legislation, you type in some keywords, and it will tell you all the different bills or resolutions relating to those keywords. And you can click on an individual one and you can see when it was heard, who introduced it, who co-sponsored it. You can see agency reports on it, all the basic information that anybody might expect in today's modern information-based society. If you wanted to know the background information on any of $1 million contracts that the city approves every week, the best you're going to get is if you go to the Comptroller's website, you can see a copy of a previous week's agenda. And the agenda will have the very basic information about it, but not necessarily the backup information. And even then, if you don't know what you're looking for, you have to keep checking different weeks' agendas, looking for the agenda that even has the item you're interested in. All of that information should be in a searchable database. All of that information should be easily accessible to the people.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the previous administration in our office literally had no interest in being more computer enabled. They liked working with paper. And when the previous comptroller left and her deputy had retired a few months earlier, we inherited a staff that had been discouraged from dealing with their work electronically. Which, by the way, in the middle of a global pandemic, when we're encouraging people to telework, absolutely everybody in that office was coming in every day.
Wow.
Because they did not have equipment to work at home, and the process didn't allow for it. We spent a couple weeks getting to understand the subtleties of the process as was, and now we're doing little changes. It's my chief of staff calls them baby steps. We're doing things like encouraging agencies to send us electronic copies as well as the paper copies, so that we can have our people start getting used to cutting and pasting information into the agenda instead of retyping it, which is what they were doing. We're looking at what would be the best database for us to use if we wanted to start storing this information so that the public can search it, because and this is, Donnie heard me say this a lot over the last 2 years. I really believe if more people understood how the city was spending its money, we would spend it better.
Right.
There has been a veil of secrecy around the details of how Baltimore city government actually spends money. And in the past, the Comptroller's office has been complicit in that, and I am there. This is a really long-winded way of answering the question, why am I doing this?
No, we appreciate the details.
Yeah, I am there because the Comptroller's office should be the most open and transparent and communicative offices of city government, given its role as a watchdog, and to be complicit in the veil of secrecy does a disservice to the people of Baltimore.
So,
and you mentioned that before. You said,
can I get a question in?
Yes, sir, you can.
Comptroller, I didn't want to get too far.
Don't fight, people. There's enough for me to go around.
Lord have mercy.
They've run from us before, but we've been joined, I wanted to tell you, by Attorney Bob DeShield. I just wanted to know, what was your thoughts, agenda going in on day one? Thank you.
My thought agenda. Well, if we're going to be candid, I got to be candid here in front of the counselor. If we're going to be candid, my first thought on day one was I really wish my dad could have seen this because my father had just passed away in April of last year, and he had really been the person who had shown me the importance of caring about local government. I tell people a lot that when they ask why I got into this in the first place, I say my parents were leaders by example. My mom was a big believer in making the world a better place, and my dad was a big believer in, if you're going to make the world a better place, start with the part of the world that's right around you. And so that's why I've really focused all of my efforts as an adult on different ways to try to make Baltimore City better, because this is where I'm from. This is where I'm going to be. This is where my kids are. This is where I care about, and I'm trying to make it better. And so my other thoughts on day one were, okay, I've been working towards this now for 18 months. Let's start making it happen. Let's get in there and start getting some work done.
So give us 3 priorities that, you fortunately you did have some time with COVID going on to kind of sit back and think about it. What were your 3 top priorities in getting in based on the research and studies that you had done previously to get to this point?
So the number one goal was to modernize the office, to really bring it fully into the 21st century in terms of not just what it's capable of doing, but what it's capable of being for the people of Baltimore. Those of you with a background here may appreciate the fact that in doing the research, I came across a quote from Jackie McLean.
Oh my gosh!
In 1991, after she won the primary to be comptroller and was taking over from Hyman Pressman, who had been the comptroller since, I believe, 1963. She was quoted in The Sun as she was looking forward to bringing the office into the 20th century.
There you go.
And it only took another 30 years to need to bring it into the 21st. So goal number 1 is modernizing the office. Goal number 2 is being a little bit more intentional and more proactive in the auditing functions that the comptroller's office oversees. There is a biennial audits oversight commission that was created by charter amendment about 5 years ago. The commission works with the city auditor and the comptroller as part of the commission to direct what specific audits the city does. It requires that every year we audit 8 of 16 key agencies. One of the things that the charter amendment, or the charter now, because the amendment's passed, one of the things that the charter requires is that we audit these 16 key agencies every other year, so 8 a year, and that we audit them both with financial audits and with performance audits. And one of the things that has become clear, and I'm looking forward to working with the mayor and city council to make a change in the charter so that we don't have to do the individual financial audits and can use those resources to do more performance audits. Because really, it's not like we're a city where each agency has its own bank account. So when we do the consolidated financial report for the whole city every year, which we do every year, we're effectively doing a financial audit of all the agencies. And it's a little bit of duplication to then go do individual financial audits for the agencies. It would be better and smarter for us to work to take those resources and use that to do more performance audits, because frankly, I don't think there's anybody in the city who would say every agency in city government is just running so well. and so efficiently. And there are no things that we need to be looking at in terms of how operations could be made better. And so I would rather focus on those types of things, the things that really affect people's daily lives. I'd rather focus on that. Councilman Eric Costello, who chairs the Biennial Audits Oversight Commission, he's already working on this, and I'm looking forward to supporting his efforts.
That performance audit, can you go dig a little deeper with that? What does that mean?
Okay, yes. So first, the performance audits, they look at individual operations of agencies. So, for example, one of the ones that was done recently is we concluded an audit of the law department. And the metric that we chose, we being the Biennial Audits Oversight Commission 2 years ago, chose to look at is the same metrics that are in the budget book that the budget department uses to track an agency's progress.
Okay.
And so one of them was how the law department does in responding to MPIA requests or public information requests. And what was made clear from the audit is that they can give us numbers and we can confirm them in a performance audit. But what we also came out with, and the city auditor put this in his report, was this is actually a bad metric for us to be using in terms of the way that the state's MPIA statute works. The state requires that people submit MPIA requests to individual agencies. And so the individual agency might contact the law department and ask for advice in handling it, or they might not. And so the law department doesn't necessarily even know how many public information requests are actually being submitted to the different agencies because, as they were very clear in responding to the Department of Audits, it would be illegal for them to require people to make the request of the law department, so that the law department would be the entity keeping track of this information.
Is that based on the charter? Or?
No, that's based on state law.
Okay.
Which we have to follow, because even if state law disagrees with something in our charter, state law takes precedence.
Okay.
So how is that?
I'm sorry, you say again?
Yeah, no, I'm questioning how is that process now simplified if you're working from bringing it from an analog system into the digital? It just seems like there was a lot of time that would have been put into, having actual paper moving around rather than being able to access it digitally. So what does that look like in terms of the transition?
Wait, I'm sorry. Are we? Yeah, if I could just finish the.
No, you can finish the thought. Go ahead.
The point I was making about the performance audit is that by doing that performance audit, the Department of Audits sparked a conversation between the law department and the city council and the mayor and our office on what is the best way for us to be dealing with public information requests. And should there be some type of central clearinghouse where, even though we can't require the public to reach to one central point of one central clearinghouse in the city, we can't require that because that would be a violation of state law. But there's nothing preventing us from saying that there's going to be a person in the law department or the mayor's office or the comptroller's office or the city council president's office, but there is going to be one person who's going to be where every agency has to tell that they got a request. I'm actually hoping that it's going to be the new city administrator. We're going to be talking to him about this to see whether that would be a good function for his office to be filling. But that was my example of how a performance audit can reveal for you. Like, we had just been tracking this number for years because at some point when the budget department came up with outcome budgeting, they needed a metric to track for the law department. And but the performance audit helps you to actually think about the things that you were taking for granted. And that's why I think it would be important for us to use more of our auditing resources doing more performance audits.
Okay.
And I see my former and current colleague, Dr. Bullock. Do you prefer Dr. Councilman or Councilman Doctor?
Call me whatever, as long as you call me.
Especially for dinner.
There you go.
While we have the stage, Councilman, you wanted to announce an event that you have coming up on February the 14th.
Yes. So good morning, everybody. Thank you, Donnie. I see a lot of my good friends here. It's just really a pleasure to be with you. Make it really plain and short. We're going to do a Valentine's event on Sunday the 14th. We want to show a little love to folks in the community, particularly in the 9th District. So just letting folks know you can come past the Empowerment Academy, 851 Bradish Avenue. We're handing out gloves, or handing out masks, bags, and just some goodies for folks. Again, it's just an opportunity just for us to connect. It's a very difficult time for all of us, but definitely want to show some love to the community.
That's great.
I think, Johnny. Hold on a second. Kavette was trying to say something when you were finishing your thought, Mr. Henry. Kavette, you want to go back to your question so you can finish asking him the question?
I'll hold off on that for a moment. I wanted to hear what Mr. DeShiel had to say. Thank you, Marcia.
Good morning, everybody. How you doing? As my friend Comptroller Henry was talking, and he mentioned a name that I hadn't thought about in many years, Hyman Pressman. And I remember the day that Hyman came to the Board of Estimates with one sock on, and that was the day that he made a declaration that's never been adhered to, which was that from that day forward, any bidder who submitted a duplicate bid had to make sure that it was in fact a complete duplicate, because there was an issue before the board about how a dispute should be resolved when the duplicate bid was different from the actual bid that was in the hands of the agency. But the comptroller's office, going back to my earliest memory, has always been a position that was supposed to be a watchdog position. If there was even going back to the most do it now mayor I think we've ever had, which was Donald Schaefer, Pressman was as I recall, the only member of the Board of Estimates who really ever stood up to Schaefer. And he had, and when that office, he gave credibility to the office of comptroller, which most people in the city had no idea what the comptroller even did. But he gave credibility to the office, and he established, I think, the tradition that Comptroller Henry is trying to reinvigorate, which is really making the comptroller an advocate for the people. Now, the other thing is that the product and what he said about the PIA request, and I've made a few over the years, is absolutely correct. You do have to make a request to each agency, but he's also correct that common sense would say to the agency to forward a copy of the request to somebody, to the law department or whoever it is, that could ultimately give assistance or guidance or make a decision on what was appropriate to disclose and what was not. I'm glad to see that common sense was something that has not been around consistently, in my opinion, over the years. And I'm glad to see that coming back in the comptroller's office. So I think that it was refreshing, frankly, to hear Comptroller Henry talk about the improvements that he wants to make in that office. And the reason, if you ask a city employee why things are done a certain way, the answer that you get most often is that's the way we've always done it. And
That's right.
not
Oh
an
my
answer.
goodness.
That explains why you're doing it the way you're doing it right that moment, but that doesn't give the answer why. And I'm glad that somebody's asking that question and trying to put together some answers that make sense.
Thank you. And John knows that this is something that the city council has always been the people who ask why, or at least in the last 20 years I can speak to. The city council often asks why, but because of the way that the charter is structured, frankly, the agencies don't have to give good answers. They give the answers they want to give, and there has been relatively little that the city council can do if it's not satisfied with the answer. One of the things that is nice about being the comptroller is now when agencies bring issues or requests to the board and we ask questions about them, if we're not satisfied with the answers, we can just tell them, well, hey, listen, I don't think the comptroller is going to vote for this, and the comptroller is probably going to call around to the mayor and the council president and try to convince them not to vote for this. So, do you maybe want to rethink this issue? Come back if you've got a better. Come back when you've got better answers.
That brings to mind $11 million for 45 speed cameras, Mr. Comptroller, with no questions at all, according to the report I read. Any thoughts?
So I had asked questions of the agencies. We got a briefing from Director Sharkey at DOT. We talked about it, and all of my questions were answered. So I didn't have any more questions to ask when it got to the board.
Well, I just didn't understand how in the middle of a pandemic, that was like the first big budget, unless I missed it, big budget item voted on.
Well, I don't think that. Well, I mean, we've voted on a number of items that were in the millions of dollars. We do that every week. I mean, I know that the speed and the red light cameras stand out because people tend to get more upset about them than they do about spending $8 million repairing a sanitary sewer line. But the reality is that the speed cameras and the red light cameras also generate income as well as cost money. And the truth of the matter is, and I can speak to this as much as a council person that I used to be, neighborhoods ask for them. You know, there are plenty of people out there who feel like the traffic coming through and around their neighborhood is too fast, and they are constantly looking for traffic calming solutions. As a council person, it was really frustrating when you would have community groups complaining that they needed traffic calming, and then you'd go to DOT and DOT would say, oh, well, there's this road has such and such a grade, and so you can't put speed humps on it, or this road is used by the fire department as a regular route for their trucks, so we can't put speed humps on it. And a speed camera, on the other hand, doesn't care whether their road has a slope or whether the fire trucks are using it, and it becomes a potential deterrent in a less physical way than a speed hump would, but in a definite form of behavioral modification. It hits people in the pocketbook instead of in the undercarriage of the car. I got three people talking. I can't hear either.
Why don't we just put CCTV in Baltimore and get it over with?
I'm not sure I understand the point.
In DC, they have closed circuit television on every corner. Why don't we just go ahead, stop pussyfooting around, and just put cameras everywhere? Because my point is, at what point are they predatory?
Yeah, Don, can I speak to that for just a second? Because I think that there comes a time when one objective morphs into another. When the idea of putting speed cameras in or creating the environmental control board was implemented. It was the speed cameras. It was an idea of public safety, which no one would disagree with. However, it's morphed into just another revenue stream. The fact of the matter is, nobody's even conducted any studies to determine whether or not the accidents before or after speed cameras are any less severe or any less frequent, because it's become a revenue stream. The same thing with, in my opinion, the Environmental Control Board. The problem with is the people who are paying the revenue are those who are already depleted. Are those the people who are primarily paying the fines and paying the citations are the citizens of Baltimore in the communities who are already lacking in sufficient revenues. So that in my opinion, the even notwithstanding the money that they bring in, that they should, things that impact upon people who already have little resources ought to be looked at more carefully, and they ought to be carefully examined periodically to make sure that the original objective, that is the safety or the environmental cleanliness, that those things don't give way to just the idea that this is another way to us. It becomes an alternative tax, in other words.
So, Counselor, I'm only going to cut you off because I think our mutual friend Bill Gooden already reached out to my office last week to make that same point.
Okay.
And I'm just saying that. So I've already asked my staff people to look into exactly that. We're going to try to get some data from the Department of Transportation and see if we can do that analysis of can we show that the speed cameras or the red light cameras actually do reduce accidents in the areas that they've been put in. And also we're researching apparently out in Missouri, this issue came up over whether or not these kind of cameras are legal. Which I assume is a constitutional issue, but I've asked to have that part examined as well.
Very good.
This segment is brought to you by the Black Engineer of the Year Awards Conference happening next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Please go to BAYA.org. Councilman, I'm curious, is anyone in your district asking for speed cameras?
So, frankly, no. I will say most of the requests, and Comptroller Henry kind of mentioned this, we get a lot of requests around traffic calming, particularly stop lights, stop signs. So those are some things that we're hearing. Quite frankly, we have some thoroughfares where we're seeing, high rates of traffic. So I do understand that. As a former transportation planner, I'm also interested in accident data. And how that actually plays into some of the corridors where we're seeing these cameras that are going up. But our office has not gotten those. The one request we have gotten has been around trucks. So a lot of our trucks are going through neighborhoods when they should really be on the major thoroughfares. So those are some of the things that we're hearing, but not so much around the cameras.
And we do have
on the opposite end of that. And I hear what everybody is saying, but just to play, devil's advocate for a moment, let's just say that maybe the cameras are a good thing. I live in an area, I live in Greenbelt, Maryland, and I drive, quite a bit for, my work. And I go through different areas that have these speed cameras and that have red light cameras. I use my GPS to help identify, where they are at some occasions. But what, for the most part, for me, it has helped to raise my consciousness so that I am not speeding at all. So I'm paying attention to what the speed limits are in different areas. I'm looking for those signs so that I'm not, distracted and so that I won't get caught in the trap of the speed camera. But I think that would be something that people would want to happen, that people would want for someone to be more conscientious as they're driving through their neighborhood so that they're not speeding in school zones where I've seen them mostly in Montgomery County and PG County. That, you're going to be going down. No, I said, I don't have a question. I'm making a statement on the other side of the issue, because here everyone is saying that, oh, these speed cameras are so bad. Why you're going to be taking money from people who, are already, needy, or don't have the money. Well, my thing is, if you don't have the money to pay the ticket, just go to speed limit.
Yeah, but Kevin, there's no study that says that 37 miles an hour is any less safe than 25. The problem is that most of these
But it's still the speed limit.
most of these speed limits were developed when cars didn't go faster than 60 miles an hour, and they haven't been changed over the years. So I'm for safety, but but if the comptroller's office gets the support that he's requested, then eventually we'll really find out whether or not any of these measures really affect the original objective, which was public safety, or whether in fact they've turned into what I suspect simply another means of revenue generation and alternative taxing mechanism. In other words,
I'd like to know what the study is on whether or not these speed cameras chase people from Baltimore. If people no longer want to live here, if businesses no longer want to come here, Comptroller.
I don't know how I can study that exactly, but I can tell you that over 13 years in the city council, I think Dr. Bullock has heard some of this. Over 13 years in city council, you hear a lot of people complain about why they're gonna leave Baltimore City, and you even hear some people still complaining about why they left. And I will say that in the last, I think we've had these speed cameras now for going on 10 years. I have never, ever, ever, ever heard anyone either say they left Baltimore City because of the speed cameras, or that they're gonna leave Baltimore City because of the speed cameras, especially considering that speed cameras are statewide. You know, as Ms. Kane pointed out, they have them all over the state. So in the scheme of things, I'll repeat the rest of the conversation I had with Bill Gooden. You know, I'm perfectly happy to acknowledge that this city doesn't do everything it could for the people who need the most. That is something that I think we all need to be working more on. This is not high on that list in terms of, if you don't, like Ms. Kane said, it's only a tax on people who go too fast. If you can't afford to pay the ticket, just don't go fast. Okay, as somebody who lives on a street that is only 1.5 lanes wide, but has the same speed limit as a street that is 2 or 4 lanes wide, I can tell when somebody is going more than the speed limit on my street rather easily, and it is not safe. Counselor, I can give you very direct scientific data that will tell you that an accident at 37 miles an hour is significantly more likely to result in serious injury or death than an accident at 25 miles an hour. There is scientific documentation for that.
At what point are they predatory, Comptroller?
Well, can I say, as a case study for me personally, you know, I've received those tickets, and all it's done for me when I was speeding in those areas. Right, but I'm presenting an opportunity for a perspective on the other side of this issue. And when I have received those tickets, because I haven't received a whole lot of them, but the ones that I did receive, it made me conscious of the areas that I was driving in to not do that. And it's usually right around my neighborhood.
Excuse me, Mr. Comptroller. At what point are they predatory?
I would be happy to react to a definition of predatory. Considering I don't think they're predatory, I'm not going to be the one to come up with that definition. But if you think they're predatory, tell me what you think that means.
Well, if they're not predatory, then let's just put them on every corner like CCTV in DC and stop half-stepping.
I think that if you will look at the history, they have continued to roll out more cameras every year or so. It costs money to invest in putting them out, and they get enough money back from them that they can afford to put another set out. And frankly, the truth of the matter is, I mean, I know that in the 9th district, maybe they're not sought after, but in the 4th district, I did have lots of neighborhoods who were constantly asking for traffic calming. And if the option was a speed camera, they were okay with taking that because, and this is key, the people who complain to government that their streets are not safe are probably the people who are going to be comfortable driving the speed limit.
Allow me to jump in really quickly.
People are worried about getting shot in Baltimore, not hit by a car.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean they aren't worried about getting hit by cars, and that doesn't mean that getting hit by cars shouldn't be a worry. Go ahead.
Well, I think all these are important pieces, and Councilman Henry kind of got to a point that I was at, or Comptroller Henry, excuse me, former Speaker.
He has a new job. He has a new job.
I know, right? But interestingly enough, so I represent the 9th district, but there are times where I've driven through the 4th district, particularly on my way to Towson when I was teaching in person. Now I'm teaching online, and I would say you look at that York Road corridor, where again it's a different wealth profile than say Edmondson Avenue in the 9th district. So I think that's one of the distinctions that some people see in terms of the relative wealth of those communities. I think that may be where Donnie's going in terms of the predatory nature, or at least that question. At the same time, I think Ms. Kane makes some interesting points too, as well as far as safety and behavior modification, right? So if the goal is to get people to do something different, that may be a way to get there. But again, I think traffic calming has to be part of it as well. So I know we've talked about speed humps, we've talked about traffic lights in different areas. I think we have to have a multiplicity of approaches. I don't think the speed camera is going to work for everybody. It may work for some neighborhoods. I think speed humps are going to work in some of the side streets. So really not having a one-size-fits-all approach, but trying to be more strategic and thoughtful about where we're putting these cameras and the result. And the other point that I don't want to miss is that revenue is part of it. I mean, if we're honest about it, yes, there is the issue of safety, but it's also the counterbalance of revenue generation. And so we don't want it to be that it's just about revenue, but you also want it to be about safety, and more so about safety than about revenue.
I guess I have one of my concerns.
It's all about money. We think it's all about money. And that's why I asked the comptroller what was his priorities going in from day one. Because my thoughts, in the middle of a pandemic, new mayor, young Black man, I figured the children would be the priority, ensuring that all of the children of Baltimore City Public Schools have access to the internet, have laptops, don't have to deal with Comcast limiting how much data they get to use. I thought that would be the priority. That's why I asked the question.
Well, Donnie, can I offer at least a definition of predatory? I don't know what you were thinking, but if I were to define it, here's how I would define it as predatory, where the primary motivation is revenue and not safety. Then it's become predatory in my opinion. Now, how do you know when that happens? You look at the terms of the contract and see whether performance is geared to safety accident reduction or revenue production. In other words, if you give and I represent companies who bid for these contracts, red light cameras, both in Baltimore City and now in Montgomery County. If performance of the contract is tied to how much revenue is generated by the tickets, or if your payment to the contractor is conditioned upon how much revenue is generated, then you've come real close to the line of making revenue and not safety the most important outcome. So and those are the things that I'm concerned. Everybody, nobody that I know, and I get a lot of these tickets. So let me confess, I get a lot of them. So it's real personal to me. All right.
Thanks for your transparency, Counselor.
And with respect to Kivette, the only behavior modification it makes in me is I duck the areas where I know the cameras are.
Oh, Lord.
All right. and I suspect, if we're going to be honest, I suspect that's the only behavior modification, or that's the one that you see in most people. Now, that may support Donnie's contention that why don't we just put them everywhere, and that leaves me with no place to run. But that just means I got to put more money in my ticket paying budget.
So here's a question.
You're not gonna get me to drive 25 miles an hour in almost anywhere. If that's not a school, for example.
And you are exactly who we want to fund. You are exactly the person that we want to fund these new programs. So you may be paying for the renovations in those schools.
But Kivette, But you're right. But here's what I say. Wait a minute, Donnie. Wait a minute. When I travel down 695 at 10 o'clock at night on my way home and pass an area where during the day people are working, and I get a ticket for going too fast in a work zone when ain't nobody in God's green earth out there, that tells me I got that ticket not for safety, but because because somebody wanted my money. That's my problem.
Because you were going above 55. That's why you got the ticket.
Yeah, but I got it because I was going above 55 in a work zone at a time when there was nobody working.
But you still had to drive a certain time period, so you only can go a certain speed, regardless of what time of day it is.
Oh, Marsha, you get tickets too.
I don't get
Thank
tickets.
you, Marsha.
I don't get
Thank
tickets.
you, Marsha.
Don't even
Right.
try it. But I have a different question.
Right off and put these cameras right after you have a blockage on the road, like North and Mount Royal, the whole right lane at the busiest intersection on North Avenue has been taken away for some darn bike lane. There are no bikes in it, and then the cars are forced into a bottleneck, and then like going across 28th Street. It's already tight going across around the park, and you get across 28th Street at the bottom of the hill, there's a speed camera. So they choke you to death on one hand, and then they know you want to speed up, and they put the camera right there. That's beyond
Leave 30 minutes earlier, Donnie.
Ain't nobody asked you. You live in PG. We live in Baltimore.
Here's a question for you. We sit down and we look at budget and on all of this. One of the concerns that I have, or just question, and I don't know, I've never been a city official. When we look at 11, for me, and Donnie alluded to it or started the conversation, $11 million, or even whatever the amount, when we look at the Baltimore public school system budget, what is that budget for the year?
I believe the total city school budget is about 1.3 billion. Now that includes between 300 and 400 million from the city, and then I think maybe not quite 100 million from the feds, and the state ends up paying the lion's share, about 900 million.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't have the exact.
No, that's
numbers.
fine. I'm sure I'll get back in touch with you a little bit later. I'll give you a little bit more time. But my concern though is as we're looking at this, and we talked about audits, right? Mm-hmm. And how do we have these vacant school buildings? How do we have children whose scores are lower than if we look at the national norms? Some of the issues that we have, Aaron Mabin uncovered some problems with infrastructure, heat and problems with pipes. How do we get our public school system under control with the type of budget you're talking about, to be able to make certain that our schools are all wired, or they have the internet capability, or at least to be a tower to be able to, while we're in COVID, to be able to have every student with a computer, and the digital divide has been dealt with. How do we bring that so it's holistic?
So you've heard the expression, I'm sure, not everything is about money. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this isn't one of those times.
Okay.
There was an article in the paper the other day. I pulled this quote out and shared it with my senior staff and asked them to make this its own project. The line in the article said that Baltimore County's contribution to its school system budget is $1.9 billion. Mm. What Baltimore County puts into, not that their budget was 1.9 billion.
Right.
Their share, their local contribution to the budget was 1.9 billion.
Right.
Okay. And it went on to say that was like 40% of their whole governmental budget. Mm-hmm. Like they put almost half of what they spent. Mm-hmm. For local government, they spent towards their kids' education.
Mhm.
We spend maybe between 10 and 15% of our budget on our share of education, and the total budget, our total budget is about 2/3 of Baltimore County's share. And I don't know how much they're getting from the state and the feds. Probably not getting anything from the feds, because most of the federal money we get is income based.
Right.
But I don't know how much they're getting from the state, but I can't imagine that it doesn't at least push them over the 2 billion point.
Mm-hmm.
And their system is not that much bigger than ours in the scheme of things.
Right.
Not to that kind of scale. This is why organizations have been, education advocacy groups for years have been complaining that Baltimore City schools are underfunded. And I honestly believe that we have had the opportunity for several years now to go to the state. The Kerwin, the Kerwin solution. I know everybody's real happy about how that's going to provide for more money, and some people are blithely accepting the fact that it's going to require the city to put in more money for its own share, which, to be honest, we should be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. But it's still not going to provide the city with the amount of additional funding that several objective studies have shown the city needs. I think the state has underfunded us purposefully, now going into the third decade, and we already gave up city control over the school system back in the late 90s to get a little bit more money, when what we should have done is we should have just sued the state in federal court, because it is actually part of the state's constitution to provide an education for every child in Maryland, an equally good education. It is the state's responsibility, and they are not living up to their responsibility, and we should be holding them accountable for that.
What about the school board? Because here in Sandtown, we had 3 elementary schools. We're now down to 1. When you close a school, you kill a community. So I hear the Democratic philosophy, but the truth of the matter is, in the Black community, they're closing schools.
And those schools are being closed because the state requires that. They required that under 2 different. There has been for decades an interagency task force on school construction, which has its own ideas of how many kids should be in a school, so that if the occupancy, if the occupancy of a school drops below a level, the state will not sign off on giving you money to make repairs or new construction for other schools, because their attitude is you need to be consolidating your buildings and using them to the fullest extent before you build new stuff. And then they took that philosophy and they actually hardwired it into the 21st Century Schools program. So that whole deal where, they committed an extra $10 million a year towards the debt service for building these 25 or so new schools that they've done so far as part of phase 1, that deal required the city to close a certain number of schools.
Okay,
and that is what the school system has been doing.
So when the news reports the murders at 11 o'clock and 6 p.m. and they're in the very same neighborhoods where these schools have been closed, I just want you to know, thank you very much for not listening to the people. Not you per se, but the people are suffering out here because of decisions made by people who don't live in these communities, and it's frustrating.
Donnie, let me chime in just a little bit, because first of all, let me reject the notion that you put out there, which is that this is somehow democratically fueled, which is of course not true. But let me say, the schools have the same problem as hospitals in this respect. They are brick and mortar institutions that have come to a point when they're underutilized based upon for a number of factors. Hospitals, because there's nobody in the beds. Schools, because as Comptroller Henry has said, there's not enough kids to occupy and be eligible for state funding. The hospitals survived by taking over urgent care facilities. They went out and bought a bunch of them. Hospitals now own because the problem is you can't. The brick and mortar buildings cost too much, but you can't really afford to get rid of them because they don't. You can't rebuild them overnight. And if once you close a school, the cost of reopening it, if the population changes, is tremendous.
Okay.
So what we've got to do, I think what we've got to do, the school board and the city has little control over what the school board does. I mean, that's the board of school commissioners.
Okay.
But
hold on 1 second, DeShield.
Yes.
Comptroller Henry has to go to an 11 o'clock. So I'm sorry to have to do this, but I'm looking at his comments that he has a pre-scheduled meeting, and we want your thoughts as soon as we say goodbye to the comptroller. Thank you.
I wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity to come on. As always, I enjoy these conversations. Perhaps a little too much because now I'm a little late for my 11 o'clock. But
1 minute, 2 minutes now. Thank you.
But I would be happy. I'd be happy to come back, and also if we could follow up on some of the things that we were talking about, please don't hesitate to email me at bill.henry@baltimorecity.gov, and we can continue some of this conversation offline.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Marsha Jews, what's happening February 11th through the 13th?
Yes, the Black Engineer of the Year Awards Conference, and you can go to BEYA.org, BEYA.org, and they have several programs that are going on. 35 years of the most anticipated diversity event of the year. February 11th through the 13th. And it is rich environment for recruitment, networking, and professional development. In attendance will be corporate leaders, college representatives, thousands of professionals and students from across the country, an array of professionals from entry level to CEOs representing science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines and careers. The fields of expertise represented at the conference are as diverse as the men, women, and children who attend. The highlights that are all free would be the HBCU Village, the K through 12 Village, so make sure you get your children there. Interview Village, people are actually hiring, they're interviewing on the spot, they're hiring. And HBCU Reunion. So if you want to attend or make sure that somebody in your community or family, go to BEYA.org, www.BEYA.org. And
Mr. Bob, you got to see some of these comments. Sephora says, who exactly are the cameras protecting when kids are not going back to school and so many people are not on the roads?
That's my point. That's my point exactly. But let me get to, if I may, to finish an earlier comment, and I'm really interested in hearing what Dr. Bullock has to say. Even though I'm talking when he could be, but the problem is this. Look, Baltimore City has not contributed proportionally to education to the same extent as Baltimore County has, and I know that. I was on the county board. I know I was on the county board of education, so I know that. I got that.
Lowest in the state. Our contribution.
No. Hold, Donnie. I said what I meant to say. I didn't say the state. I said the city, and I'm saying the city for two reasons. Number one, the city isn't collecting its property taxes from the people that owe it. There are major buildings. When the city discovered that water bills weren't being paid by some of the larger developments, if they look, they'll see that the real property taxes are equally delinquent from some of those same developments. That's number one. Secondly, the school budget at the local level comes primarily from real property taxes. So you got everybody who's running for office in Baltimore City, for office for mayor, say we're going to lower real property taxes. We're going to lower real property taxes. Every time you do that or don't raise them, you're cutting education funding. The same time, every time you have a TIF, every time you have taxes and financing, instead of the money from those real property tax increases coming to school construction, guess what? They're going to repay the bonds that were issued to come up with the TIF money, but the state in its calculation of its contribution reduces its contribution by the amount of taxes from those real property improvements, which the city never put into education, but yet used to repay the bonds that we issued for the TIFs. So the city, in large part, has undermined its own contribution to education. But beyond that, the real question is, where's the money going to come from to pay for it? The problem is, as a policy matter, at the political level, the decision is how much can we get without forcing somebody to vote against us.
Okay, Dr. Bullock, please respond.
So first, I'll just say this is probably one of the most challenging panels I've ever seen, in a good way, because people are asking great questions. First, Marsha Reeves, you just want to also just highlight what you said about BEA. I think the work that Doc Taborn is doing is so fantastic. And I think trying to produce another crop of scientists, engineers, folks who can help solve some of the problems of our city, whether we're talking about camera systems and the like. Mr. DeShiel, one of the things that you mentioned is, our taxing structure. You think about not only the TIFs, but also the pilots and what we're not getting in terms of revenue. So you're making some great points. One of the things I share with my students as well is that the wealth and the funding of your schools is going to be largely dependent upon the property taxes of your jurisdiction. So you do make a cogent point as it relates to that. Then going back also to what Comptroller Henry also mentioned, and I feel this very acutely, even as Donnie mentioned, with some of the school closures. We've had a number of schools closed within West Baltimore and 9th District, and that's everything to do with enrollment. But the upside of it is, what do we do with those buildings? And I think that's something that we have to be proactive about with the real estate office, which is housed within the Comptroller's office, about having a plan moving forward. So we're working also with city schools and also working with general services in terms of what do we do with these buildings? How do we get community input to make something that's going to be positive, as opposed to having just an empty gap within the community? So we do have an opportunity in front of us. Now, there are some challenges as it relates to how we pay for Kerwin, right? People have talked about not only our contribution or our limited contribution to the school system, but then on the other side, what we pay in terms of policing, right? And so that's another challenge that we have in terms of public safety, whether we're talking about just auto traffic or crime and violence, but also in education, and they're all wrapped together. So quite frankly, there's no real easy response to it, and we can't keep losing population, because every time we lose population, those are young people who could be going to schools, those are people who could be paying property taxes, and it puts us further into a downward cycle that we don't want to be in. So you guys have really hit on all those points. And from a political point of view, I mean, we have to, keep our eye on the ball in terms of what we're doing for the future of our city.
You muted, Marsha. Open your mic.
That's real difficult for me because, I got most talkative in high school. Anyway, but, I think the thing that's really interesting that you have these buildings and are they cost prohibitive? Most people don't even think that something that's 30,000 square foot building, how do you think that you could even pay for that? What kind of organization would be able to even do something there? Or do they become centers that are more vocational, where you talk about STEM, why can't we take some of those buildings and do nothing but train and put people to work in those buildings?
And
you're
we
right
talked
How do we afford it?
Well, that was a good idea.
No, you're right on point.
Then we could have those centers all over the city. And the thing of it is that when you start talking about all this networking and all these other things that are related, we've got with BEA, you've got all these major corporations who are creating all of these positions. Why aren't we doing something instead of sending it offshore? Why can't we do that in our city? On each side of town? How many vacant school buildings are there?
Well, I got one better for you, Councilman. I understand that Edmondson West Side is losing some vocational training courses, maybe 9 or so. They're going to be coming on the show. So if you have an Edmondson West Side that's right there in the middle of the village, serving a number of surrounding communities, teaching children, teaching our students trades, but now we're cutting programs there. How is all of this stuff benefiting the Black community?
I mean, that's questionable. I mean, I'll put it this way. I mean, I have a colleague who was doing work over the West Side Skill Center, and now he and his colleagues are over at Green Street Academy, and they're doing some of the things we're talking about in terms of job training in construction and engineering, and getting these young people a pathway into employment. But we have to be, again, more targeted and also grow those programs. Even earlier when I briefly mentioned an event that we're doing around Empowerment Academy, that's the old Lafayette Elementary School that was vacant. And so now the Empowerment Academy breathed life into that building to have an educational facility. We also have Alexander Hamilton that's going to be empty. We have other schools that we're dealing with. And so there have been some cases where we've seen proposals where people looked at affordable housing or looked at mixed income housing. Some have looked at community resource centers. But these buildings in many cases are old and need significant retrofitting to make them to get them up to current speed. But again, we have to be sensitive to the people on the ground. And I say this as a planner. Oftentimes we have these great ideas in terms of what we could put into place, but if we're not connecting with the people on the ground, right, it doesn't do them any good. It has to be a place where they can walk into and get those services, whether they be young people or folks who are trying to get back on the job market. We're a lot of job creation, but the folks who need those jobs the most are not in a place to have the training and experience to actually get those jobs and be successful. So we have to be, thinking about all those things. But your point is a good one. Vocational training, career and technology, education, all of that is important in terms of where our young people are, trying to cut down on violence and some of the social ills we deal with.
But I mean, Councilman, does anyone raise the question as to why they're cutting the programs?
Well, I haven't gotten all the details about that. I know, not to punt the ball, but I know West Edmondson is in the 8th district. So I'm sure that Councilman Burnett has probably had some conversations. I've been privy to those conversations, but I don't see why you'd be cutting them. I mean, sometimes things happen because of under enrollment, but I can't imagine that being the case. So I haven't really gotten any kind of information as to why that will be cut, but I find that to be challenging, quite frankly.
Donnie, I spoke with the president of the Edmondson West Side Alumni Association yesterday about this issue, and I brought his attention that one of their most successful graduates, because I don't know whether it's alumnus or alumni, I don't know which one, but one of the most successful graduates was a guy named Robert Harrington, and who was the owner of RE Plumbing. The city has featured him as an outstanding contractor period for a number of years. But the main thing about Robert is that 2 years ago we put together a foundation. He has 3 sons. He put together a foundation that is trying to find a way to offer training to kids that want to get involved in underground utility construction. There is no such training program anywhere in the state of Maryland now. We were trying to do it at BCCC, and now we're going to start working with the Alumni Association and the school system to try to have that program. But fundamentally, what's happened, the problem with education is we've steered our kids toward college en masse in a herd fashion without taking into account that that's not the gift that many of our kids have. We've undervalued those gifts by telling kids, by establishing a culture in which somehow or another a person with a college degree is valued more than a person who can fix your plumbing.
But it's troubling, Mr. DeShields, when the mayor himself went to Mergenthaler.
Well, in the county, when there was a problem of potential closing schools, one of the stopgap measures, I'm going to say, was this whole concept of magnet schools. Rather than close the school, we made the school a place where if you wanted a particular thing, you had to go there to get it. That kept the building open. Because if you wanted to be a carpenter, if you wanted to go into and broadcast or acting or theatrical skill, you had to go to the Carver School of Theater or whatever it was called at the time. That was a way to keep the building open, because otherwise that school in Towson would have been closed. They didn't have the population had gone down. Well, those are just ideas. We've got to maintain the buildings I think because if the expectation is the population of Baltimore City is going to grow, not that at some point that those, if it's going to grow, the key to getting it to grow is to try to attract people who are still at childbearing age. People with childbearing age are not going to come here unless there's a school building to send their kids to. I mean, so you've got sort of this self-fulfilling prophecy. It's all interconnected, in other words. But again, it all goes back to funding. And
listen, since I was 8 years old, 1973, the Maryland State Lottery promised money for education. When Martin O'Malley was governor, table gambling, slots, they promised money for education. When we look downtown, you see a brand new football stadium, a brand new baseball stadium. But as Mr. Maben brought out, we have icicles on our classrooms. I am just absolutely perplexed as to all of this money raised in the name of education, but there's no money for education.
Well,
90% of education money goes to
let's hear Dr. Bullock. Just a second.
No, just really quickly, you know, I'm not at the state legislative level, but I will say one of the pieces that came out in the last couple of years has been around having a lockbox on some of those funds, because as you've sort of, you know, alluded to and kind of, you know, frankly done so, that, you know, whether we're talking about the lottery or casinos, part of the selling point was that the funds would go toward education, but those funds have been kind of fungible. They've been moving from one place to another. So being more strategic and specific around where those funds are going. But as to this point, that it has to seem like that's been the case.
Has the city council determined, when we sit down and look at what that is, and based on the conversation a few moments ago about the state and what the state has done with our funding for the city school system, has the city council sat down and really come up with a strategic plan how to go back to the state and demand more funding and to develop a better plan on how to get that back in place?
So thank you for that. So the short answer is not really, but here's the other point that I'm glad that you opened this door. Here's what happened, what got passed in terms of the charter amendment is now the city council has authority now to move money around in the budget. In prior years, it was essentially the mayor's budget. And so only thing the council could do was to cut. Now, moving forward, there is the opportunity for the council to be able to then make a statement in terms of where funds should go. So I will keep your eyes open, because it's going to be very interesting what those conversations look like, not only amongst the city council and the mayor, but then also what it means in terms of the state. Because if we have to pony up as it relates to education and Kerwin and all that, then there has to be decision making in terms of what's getting cut and where we're then going to put those kinds of priorities. But to your point, that's something we need to also be working with our state legislature and make sure we're on the same page in terms of what that funding looks like from the local and the state level to our city schools.
Okay, thank you very much.
Dr. Bullock, has there been any discussion in the council about modifying the two most stable sources of revenue for the city, which is real property taxes or the piggyback tax? I mean, both of those would require state approval, I believe. But the fact of the matter is, if the city needs more money, period. And there's only so many, and it can't print it like the federal government. So and you can't keep imposing alternative taxes in the form of red light cameras and environmental citations. So, I mean, where's the money going to come from?
Yeah, so not much conversation around the piggyback tax, but I will say you mentioned property taxes, and early in the conversation you mentioned how, you know, there are folks who are running for office and talk about reducing property taxes, and it sounds very sexy in a way that to get back to Donnie's point around losing population. You know, from an economic point, we know that people vote with their feet. Right. And so those who have the opportunity to leave, if they feel like they're being overtaxed and they're not getting the services they desire, then they can make that determination. You also make a point around folks with school-age children like myself. And so do folks, send their kids to school? What does that look like? Right. And then also thinking about the property taxes, because then if we know that our property taxes are twice that of Baltimore County, but then our service delivery may not be up to snuff, then that puts us in a very precarious situation in terms of attracting and retaining that kind of population. And then also just thinking about the quality of our school system, right? So folks have to have confidence that their young people are going to come out with a skill set that's going to make them competitive, not only in terms of college, and I teach at a university, but also in terms of our vocational training. Because quite frankly, we have some young people who try to get into carpentry and plumbing and electrical trades, and then they are behind as it relates to the reading comprehension and the mathematical skills. So we have to, be very clear about what that looks like. But as far as those conversations about taxes, that's an ongoing thing.
Yeah.
You know what, Dr. Bullock, I think you brought up a very important question. At a place I used to work, we hired some local people to be the event staff, right? And in just coming out of communities where they had either been in prison or dropped out of school, these children, even if they had been through the 8th grade, were functionally illiterate. And it's a shame, and it's a horrible black eye for the school system that you have children sitting in classrooms that can't learn. They're not being taught properly, or they have issues that need to be addressed either emotionally or mentally, because we have a lot of mental illness issues too, based on the trauma that people are going through. We have to look at our young people from a holistic standpoint in order to deal with how we're talking about 300 plus murders. We're talking about all these issues, but the reality is that these people are in pain. Years ago, we had Alvin Ailey Dance Theater Foundation of Maryland, and I was the executive director. We had a program in the evening and on the summer where we would bring and have a camp. It was called Ailey Camp. And in the fall, we took that program to UMBC, right? So we're sitting there having a conversation. There's this woman, Fidelma Ashley, brilliant woman and trainer. And we were sitting around, and she had a program talking about the kids and what they might want to be when they grow up, because they're middle school kids. Mm-hmm. And this was 1990 something. This one brother, little boy, he was just detached. He really wasn't part of the circle, right? And Fidelma asked him, and I'm sitting there observing this. And she said, so what do you want to be? What, you're not talking, but tell us where you are and what you think. Come on. And he said, I don't even see me living past 15. So if we have babies who are in the 7th and 8th grade, I'll never forget this, who don't see themselves living, who are we as a people? Who are we as a community, as a government, as a city, that our children do not see themselves having a future? And what is it that we're going to do to change this? You're on mute, Donnie.
We don't have the money for it. We're putting money into neighborhoods where there are a lot of people, and we understand that your community, East Baltimore, is challenged, but quite frankly, you don't have enough young people there, so we have to close the school there. But listen, the guy that got shot on your corner last night, we're going to send you some police over there and send you plenty of police presence. But I don't know what else to tell you, Mrs. Hughes.
Yeah.
Until we deal with that reality and quit playing, we're playing, and it's BS.
Look,
it's not right.
You both are making points, and I'm so sensitive to what you're saying for a couple of reasons. You mentioned, think about around 1990. I was, in 6th grade and 7th grade, and it was in 7th grade that my first neighbor got killed, right? And so I think about the trauma that I deal with. I think about, my family dealing with addiction and unemployment and incarceration and murder and all those kinds of things. And so we know that our young people are only they're products of their environment. So if you have to walk to school through what looks like a war zone, you're going to carry that with you. If you're hungry and you come to school, it's going to be difficult for you to learn. I say that as an educator. I'm a first generation, college graduate trying to be a professor, but it's a lot of stuff that I carry with me too. And I look at our young people who act out and folks who were either victimized or become victims or both. And so education is going to be the passport for so many of us, but, being locked out of those opportunities, it's tragic. And whether we're talking about the east side or the west side, we know that black butterfly, we know a lot of our folks have been starved from opportunities. And I know, I have two young boys, and they're blessed in having, parents who have degrees that can read to them at night, and they have a full stomach, and they have internet capabilities and connectivity and books and devices. But that's not true for everybody. And so we have to really be intentional about trying to provide those opportunities for our young people on the front end, so that we're not talking about, arrest and incarceration on the opposite end. So, we all feel that pain, and we know exactly what you're speaking to, because it's not a new circumstance, not a new issue.
Nope.
But it's something that we continue to deal with.
Right.
And it's still relevant, because there is some little boy that has that same sentiment today. And that's the shame of it.
Right. And all of the BS that we keep talking, all of the little things, we got a problem with the light, we got a problem with the ticket, we got a problem with we can't get the contract, we can't get anything until we bring the human issue to this conversation, and to the people who are suffering in our community, that we are in real pain. We have real trauma here in this city. And until we deal with that and talk about how we're going to help our people, we're going to keep having this same conversation, this time 10 years from now. This is 2021. Why are we talking about it? And I'm talking with the same thing that I'm talking about from 1992, 93, whatever year it was. That doesn't make any sense to me. You keep doing the same thing over and over again. It's insanity. We're going to keep having the same conversation. This time,
Mr. Golden, can you please turn down the volume on your computer?
21. Why are we talking about it? And I'm talking with the same
Hey,
thing.
Bill. Hey, Bill.
Yeah.
92, 93, whatever year it was.
You got to cut that off. You got a question, Bill?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but you got background noise.
Okay, what do I need to do?
Turn off the Facebook. Turn off Facebook. Turn off Facebook. Thank you.
Let me try it again.
Marsha, the reason why we have the same conversations is because we have the same issues, and the reason that we have the same issues is because there's nothing new under the sun. It's not so, in my opinion, it's not so much we have the same conversation, is that somehow out of this conversation we end up with people who, with a renewed commitment to try to change things, because it's only the people, as you say, the people are hurting, but it's only people that can change the system. When we talk about the city or government, we're really talking about the people. Government is an inanimate object. It means nothing beyond the will of the people who occupy the position to do what is right to do.
Yeah, I know that.
If you don't have that, you got nothing anyway. I don't care what you call it. So, and the problem, in my opinion, is government makes policy decisions, and they should make policy decisions based on facts and law. They, unfortunately, too often the policy decision is based upon what it takes to get reelected. That's the problem.
Okay. And
You're not gonna get an argument from here. You make a good point.
Saying? It's here, and the focus. We keep talking about the numbers, and Erica Bridgeforth goes, and it breaks my heart every time she's out creating an environment to make a space sacred that somebody got murdered in. That's so powerful to me. And how is that even? How do we even allow that kind of thing to happen? That this woman bears her soul and goes to the ancestors and prays to God that their spirit will live. That's so deep to me. And we look at it, we're so anesthetized with all the foolishness that we look at, but we're not looking at our people and that they're hurting and they need help. We need to help them. And we put people in power to be able to help the citizens of our community, not to be playing these games with people's lives. People are dying. People are hurting. People are starving. People are homeless. How is this possible that we don't have a holistic approach in leadership to change the lives and trajectory of the people in this community.
Jason, you want to
Period.
chime in? Jason?
Well, good morning. Good morning, still, folks. Good morning. I feel you, Ms. Hughes. My heart is just as weary and as weak as yours in this circumstance, in these trying times in our city. Uh, Last year, I lost three cousins. Two of them just reached the age of 18. This year, the second murder this year was a cousin and a family member of ours. So we've lost a total of four
I'm
cousins.
sorry for you.
Yeah, and
Sorry,
over
baby.
the last 13 years. What's interesting is recently I reached out to the city council members and I tried to just express my concerns when the peacekeepers can't get in the streets and keep the peace and lose their lives in the process. You know, something needs to be done. And a lot of folks that know me know that I was associated and a part of the Eye in the Sky, the surveillance plane, and have really pushed and advocated that because I want to see the genocide end in our community. But what I saw instead was I saw several council members reply back to me and talk about their opinion or their philosophical reasons as to why they didn't want to utilize the program. And I had to reply back to each of them and tell them, when you use terminologies like I instead of we and us, there's a problem. That's why we see the bike lanes. We see the bike lanes because a
That
few
nobody
folks,
uses.
right, a few folks within their district, align themselves with these politicians who believe in my policies, not our policies. I was using an example to someone recently. I know of a community that has plenty of tree canopy, for years. And right around the corner, lives basically a desert where there's no trees. And asthmatic studies have showed that these children, have asthma, and could really benefit from tree planting. I watched as this one community fought to have a dozen trees planted in one community that had a canopy of trees, and you walk down the streets of this neighborhood that's disenfranchised, that gets no resources, and they have empty plots, empty spots where there are no trees at, and studies, John Hopkins studies, that show that these children have asthmatic issues. So it's like, the way that we do governance in the city is almost kind of in some cases like a monarch, like a dictatorship, as opposed to evaluating what's going on in our communities, and in some cases working from the bottom up, resolving the greatest needs first: homelessness, impoverishment, economic development, things of that nature. We keep giving to organizations and groups and companies that have the ability to do for themselves. We give them tips and all kinds of benefits in the process while we continue to underserve those in our community. And when do we, finally get politicians in office, that really speak for the voice of the majority of the people of Baltimore City who happen to be folks of color, When are we going to stop doing that?
Well, and it keeps going on and on. I mean, it clearly, because all you have to do is get in your car and drive from one neighborhood to another. So you can look at a zone that has a councilmatic zone and drive around each one. And depending on your zip code is going to be dependent upon what kind of service that you get. And your service is going to be the priority because allegedly you pay the taxes in that community and your skin is not melanin. And so the hope is that with this new administration, there's going to be reality-based government and governance, and that people will see the community in a broader light as human beings opposed to as an afterthought.
Well, I won't hold my breath because I'm afraid I may choke in the process of waiting for this to happen. I mean, even with the red light and speed camera situation, you can go on a map online and see exactly where all the positions of these cameras are. You don't see them in Hamden. You don't see them as deep in Roland Park. And they
Right.
have schools there, and I'm
Well,
pretty
but
sure
they
that,
won't
you know,
allow
the
it.
Jewish
But they won't
community
allow it.
and other, correct, correct. You put
They're
one
not.
in
They
their
don't
community,
allow it.
and they will immediately call the counselor and have it removed. Yes.
They don't allow it. That is not acceptable to them. And how dare you even think that you're gonna come over here and put that mess in my neighborhood?
Maybe they aren't concerned about the safety of their children.
Well, what they want is whatever it is that they want. They want what they want. They want what they want when they want it. Period. And they get it. And
But
that's the
we are,
bottom line.
but Marshall, we are they.
Well,
We,
I'm talking
we
about whoever they is because they
yeah,
have it and we don't. So how about
yeah.
that?
Well, we are they. The last 3 mayors of Baltimore have been black. The majority of city council of Baltimore
However,
for the last
however,
20 years or more has been black.
however,
Yeah.
this is the sum total of all of that.
Mr. Bill Gooden, welcome to the conversation. How are you, Sarah? Thank you for your advocacy over at least 30 years or so. You're the man that goes downtown and tell them, hey, when you find the guns, destroy the guns. When you find the cocaine, destroy the cocaine. But I don't know how much of that actually happens. Welcome.
Well, first and foremost, Donnie, let me just say thank you. And, you know, again, you know, we're in February, so let me say happy Black History Month to everybody. And again, happy New Year's to everybody. But, you know, I'm so thankful that I have an opportunity to be a part of this here dialogue. But since that you brought that up, Donnie, you know, since that we're talking about safety, I heard Miss Jules where it kind of really broke her heart to even speak about some things. But Donnie, you know, that's something we've been raising for over 30 years. Why is it that we have $1 billion industry when we're talking about drugs and guns, and we don't want nobody to have oversight of what the police department do to them? I mean, we have seen evidence after evidence that the police department is corrupt, but there's no accountability in terms of what happened to the drugs and weapons that they confiscate on the street to assure us that these weapons and drugs is not getting back on the street. And then why shouldn't a portion of confiscated dollars be earmarked to come right back into our communities to help heal our communities?
You were doing so good, then your volume went down. Did you have a question?
No, I'm sorry. My phone, somebody tried to call me.
Okay.
So I'm saying, so why shouldn't we have a citizens group to assure other citizens that them drugs and weapons is really being destroyed, opposed to we just have to take the police word that they destroy? And let me also say this, Don, and please everybody, because I always say this to everybody: don't take Bill Gooden's word, man. At our fingertips, we could Google drugs and weapons stolen from the police evidence room, and we got tons of information to pop up all around the country. And yet we do not want to challenge this and ask the people that represent us to make sure that we have some accountability over the police department. Why is that?
Okay, but that's not why you called.
But that's a good question.
That's not why I called, because I've been listening, and I called for many reasons. But since you brought that up, I wanted to say that I really tuned in because of the camera situation. And, you know, of course, Bill Henry is not online no more, but I told Bill Henry, listen, they can say what they want to in terms of, well, we have citizens that want the cameras. Man, that's bull stuff. You know what I'm saying? How many citizens don't want the cameras? You know what I'm saying? Why not put it before the ballot and let the citizens vote on something that they want or what they don't want? You know what I'm saying? We in a pandemic, and what they're doing is adding misery to poor people. That's why you can get 100 tickets and no, you never get a point on your record as long as you pay for it. They don't care you got 1,000 tickets. So it's all about revenue, as the attorney said and as you said. But you know the problem is, down there, I'm going to say this, I'm going to close. The problem with everything that we're talking about is this: we cannot unify enough citizens to have power to give to Black people and poor people to have leverage to make sure we get something done that we know that need done. We know what our problems are, but we don't have power because we're not unified enough to amplify our powers.
Tell the truth. Shame the devil.
Have a blessed day, big brother. We got to close out of here.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, sir. It's been a powerful show, folks. And Marcia, we didn't even get to what we also need, Mr. DeShields, and maybe, I don't know, do we?
Let's talk about it another time. We don't want to get it started because
You don't
that'll
wanna
be started.
Yeah, you don't want to get me
You don't
started.
want to. I think we should have an offline later on today, and then we can do it maybe tomorrow because it needs to be holistic.
To
And I
say the
gotta
least,
go.
we've gotten a ton of calls over the Tamara Brown interview, and she will be back on this show on Tuesday. Marsha, do a final plug for Baya, and we so appreciate you, Marsha. You know, Marsha, you are a handful, and I know when your hair is all the way out, that means you're going to act up. But I want to let everybody know that I love you, Kavette, you know, and thank you for being patient with me. I'm trying to do my best. You know,
All right, Anthony. So listen.
Don't
We
do
already
that.
know because that's what he sounds like.
I'm gone.
He
I'm
does
gone.
it all the time. He does it all the time.
I'm gone.
So February 11th through the 13th, the Black Engineer of the Year Awards Conference. And it is really powerful. I've been involved with this for well over 20 years now. And I'll tell you, to see so many people who look like us doing the daggone thing in every major corporation in science, technology, engineering, and math, their governments through and it's international really because people get selected to win awards from all over the world. They have programs for young people, college students, and if you go to www.beya.org, you'll find the information and learn more about it. And I would highly recommend that you and your family, your children, because there's a K through 12 program, there's a college program, and you all should really participate. It is absolutely phenomenal. And the information and the people that you'll meet is just staggering. So I really appreciate it and celebrate it every year. So www.beya.org. Thank you all so much.
And we'll catch you on Clubhouse a little later. Thank you, Marsha Jews. Mr. Bob, you want to put a plug in for your services as a corporate attorney?
No.
Okay. You want to put a plug in for yourself?
I'm here. People know where you can reach me on Facebook or Instagram for financial advice.
Up to date, down tomorrow, do your day and everything will follow. Nothing to it but to do it, or gots to do it regardless of how I feel. I am somebody. I am my brother's keeper. Good morning, BlackUSA.News.
Good morning, Black USA.